Welcome to another edition of Fridays with Father. Happy you could be with us today. It's interesting, this past week I received an email from a gentleman who was rather, how would you say, worried, anxious. And he's worried and anxious about a good thing. He's worried and anxious about the sins of the president and wanted me to talk about that. Well, you know, I'd rather really not talk about that so much, because then people will start to say, well, you're just delving into politics and the church should never be involved in politics, and there's this thing called the separation of church and state. And so churches can never say anything about political issues. Well, I think there's some problems there, and I'd like to address a little bit of those first of all. Well, when we talk about the sins of the president, well, you know what? It would be a presentation that would be way too long. I don't mean to pick on President Trump, but if we go back in history, we realize that our presidents have not been perfectly moral people. We know of a number of different problems with President Clinton's presidency, also John F. Kennedy, President Roosevelt, and now we have problems in our own time with some of the things that have been reported about President Trump. So, political party aside, I think we really have to talk about some of these things, and also too, why doesn't the church just jump right in and criticize what is happening? Well, first of all, service to the public is a very important and a very noble task. People who get into politics, I really believe, want to see that things are better for their city, for their nation, for society in general. And so sometimes we can react rather cynically and say, they're just in it for the power, just in it for the money, just in it for the influence. I have known a few politicians, political people over my time, and I have found them to be really, really wonderful people who really want to serve their people well. At the same time, there's a great deal of temptation that surrounds that office. People and businesses want those politicians to do favors for them. And they might say, well, I'll make a donation, a sizable donation to your campaign if you do this for me. And certainly that's where things get really, really wrong. We know that politicians should be above that. Actually, not politicians, anybody should be above that, not selling their influence to others. We should always reach out to other people, not for money, but basically for the good that they do for society. And so we pray for our politicians that they follow a good path, that they reject the temptation that can come to them. I would imagine that any number of businesses would love to have city contracts, because it's a steady form of payment, a steady form of work. And I would imagine there's a lot of temptation to maybe make some backdoor deals in order to get the work that they would want. However, politicians always have to walk a higher road. They should always reject that type of bribery, that type of temptation, because we ought to work in a merit society and not a power and influence and payment society. And so we pray for our politicians that they'll do their job well. As we get into some of the things that were addressed with President Trump and some other people before him, the one thing I pointed out to a politician, I had a meeting with one of our congressmen, and he was lamenting also the fact that there's been all of this negative news about politicians. And I said, you know, the congressman really has a difficult road ahead of him. Look at the title that people give Congress. If you write a letter to a congressman or a congresswoman, you usually preface it by saying, the Honorable so-and-so, the Honorable. And so it seems to me that right there in that title, every single congressperson, every single senator, every single president should always act in an honorable way. However, they are human beings, and so their own humanity sometimes gets in the way. And there are things that we would like them to do, but unfortunately they cannot get to everything. So then, how does the church relate to political people, to politicians? As I've said, I've known politicians, and they really are trying to do their best for their people. And the church has a particular role in all of this. First of all, a church is kind of a leaven for society. We are called upon to say that there are some things that are wrong, and there are some things that are right. That there is ethics and morals in our society. And so our society is not just anything goes, or power and influence go to the highest bidder, or that money rules all things. We would say as a church that the good of all people is the most important part of the political process. First of all, every single person in our society is a human being that deserves respect, that deserves justice, and deserves love. And so those three things are very, very important. And so when we say that someone is made in the image and likeness of God, then there are particular things that are part of their character that they deserve. For example, the Pope and also bishops of the United States for many years have said that health care is a right, that also people have a right to life from conception to natural death. We also believe that people have a right to respect, a number of different rights that we have that are not just the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. That by our very nature as human beings, there are things that we have a right to. However, in our society doesn't always agree with the church. There is a great part of society that does not believe that health care is a right. There are also people who say that abortion is a right, but the church would say it's really not, because the fetus in mother's womb has a right also to life and liberty and pursuit of happiness. So as you can see, these social issues have a moral aspect to them, and sometimes society has gone the other way. And we as a church always have the responsibility to teach well as Jesus would. And so when we come at a particular societal issue, we don't come just as one political player among many, but we come to say that there's a moral aspect to how we live with each other in our society. And so when a fetus is aborted, or when someone goes hungry, or when someone doesn't have meaningful work to support his or her family, when someone wants to join a labor union and is not able to, the church would raise a hand and say, wait a minute, those things we believe are rights that should be preserved under the law, but many times, unfortunately, they are not. And so we as a church do get involved in political matters. There are some who would say that, well, the church should never get involved in this. For example, Cardinal Cupich, right after the Parkland, Florida shooting, said that we should have gun control. And a person from the NRA said that Cardinal Cupich should never talk about this because this is a political issue. Well, that political issue also has moral questions attached to it. For example, 31,000 people every year are killed by guns. That's a moral issue. When we have a Declaration of Independence that says we have life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and more than 31,000 people's lives are taken every year, then that's a problem. That's butting heads with our Constitution and also with our Declaration of Independence. So it begs the question. Also now, too, with the immigration issue, we would say that we would stand on the side of the immigrant folks who are moving, who have a right to move wherever they wish. A government also does have the responsibility and the right to protect its border from aggressors, but in many, many, many cases, immigrants are not an aggressor by any means whatsoever. They come peacefully looking for a new way of life. So what does the church do? First of all, we look at an issue and say, what does God tell us about this issue? About immigration, abortion, any number of different things. What is God inspiring us to do at this point in time? And it might be to offer our opinion and say this action is wrong, or this action is right and we should do it. And then we stand with other people in the public square and we say, this is what our religion teaches us, this is what God is calling us to do, and this is how we are going to address this particular issue. One thing that we never do is to endorse a particular candidate. So, for example, if we are for immigration, and we certainly are, Senator Durbin of the state of Illinois put forth many years ago the DREAM Act for the first time. I think it was probably about 8 or 10 years ago. And the church supported him in that. And many people were wondering, well, why are we doing that? Well, we support the legislation that this particular senator is offering. Does that mean that we believe that everyone should vote for him? No. People need to make up their minds on their own. So we never endorse candidates. And it may seem sometimes that we do because we support a particular candidate's platform or a particular issue that that candidate is putting forward. But we never go out and say, hey, I want you to vote for him. We don't do that. There are other churches, non-Catholic, that have done that do endorse candidates. As a matter of fact, even here in Chicago, I have known a number of Protestant churches that instead of the pastor giving a sermon that weekend, they'll invite a political candidate in to talk. And we would never do that. We believe seriously that our worship is our worship alone and should never be used to support a candidate. And so it's a very difficult situation because some people don't make the differentiation between supporting an issue and supporting a candidate. But we'll always support the issue first. And we don't endorse any particular candidate for an election. As a matter of fact, even here on our campus, if someone wants to collect signatures for a particular candidate, we will not do that because it just creates a conflict of interest. There are some times when a candidate might come here to visit, but at the same time, we wouldn't say that no other candidates are allowed, okay? So what we want to do is to make sure that we aren't supporting or endorsing any particular candidate for office. So we do talk about issues. We do talk about the morality of an issue. We do think seriously about how would Jesus want us to respond to this issue in our society. And sometimes it's not so easy because we realize even within the Catholic religion, you'll have Catholics who will believe one thing about an issue and other Catholics who will believe another thing about an issue. But we are always teaching. Remember that Jesus came into the world to teach, and sometimes he upset people. Sometimes people didn't exactly understand what he was talking about, but he preached nonetheless. He talked to the folks about what his vision for a just society would be. And we, continuing in that same vein after 2,000 years, continue to try to form consciences and continue to try to change opinion so that we can have a world that is more just and is more respectful of all human life. And so we pray today that that churches and also political people can work together to form a better society, because really that is the goal that both of us have. We both want to do that. And we pray also too at the same time that when we work together it won't cause disunity because of a particular issue. We always want to be people of unity and of peace. And so once again, thank you very much for tuning in. I do want to say a few final things. How do we respond as a society, or as Christian people in a society? First of all, vote. Very important to vote, very important to participate. As a matter of fact, I remember a priest that I know who lives in Africa called here at 2 o'clock in the morning. And we thought, oh my gosh, what's going on? What's happening? He must be in a lot of trouble. No, what happened was he lives in Africa, and for the first time, he was able to vote. He had never voted before. We kind of take the right to vote very much for granted. Sometimes we see it as a bother because so few people vote. However, there, he was moved to tears about the ability to vote for the first time. We should never take that for granted. Also, if you see something that you think needs to be changed in your society, don't just sit back and hope that somebody else does something about it. Talk to your congressman, talk to your mayor, talk to your alderman, whoever it happens to be. Write a letter to your senator or even the President of the United States, and make your voice known. Because remember, the first few lines of the Constitution of the United States enunciates very, very clearly who the boss is in the United States. We, the people. Not the President, not the Congress, not the Senate, but we, the people, ultimately are the boss of the United States of America. And we are called to participate in active citizenship and really involve ourselves in the direction of our nation. It's a very, very important thing to do. And so we don't sit on the sidelines. We get up and say, I am we the people, and I want to make my voice heard. So those things are very important. Get involved, vote. And so once again, thank you very much for tuning in. May God bless you, and have a great day.